pronouns are she, her. I'm the head of the mental health at work here at Equilibrium Advisory, joined by two fabulous speakers, Smriti and Vamsi, and I'm going to get into an introduction a little later. But to set context, today we are really here to talk about something that I think has been sitting heavily with a lot of working parents in the last few weeks. It's the question, is the childcare infrastructure we rely on actually built to truly keep our children safe? Or is it really built to just look good or just to look compliant on paper? Now, to set a little further context, I think these concerns and these conversations, they've been really bubbling up in the last few weeks in response to the news reports and the clips that have been circulating on social media regards an incident of physical abuse and violence, within a daycare center in Bangalore. And, I think in response to all of the news that's really bubbling up in the context of this. And today, to break this entire complex conversation down, I'm joined by Smriti and Vamsi, who I've had the privilege to work with very closely in the last several years. They are both experts in their spaces and really bringing in a wide intersection of their expertise here. I'm just going to sort of put all of these spaces that they are experts in on the landscape right now. It's child rights and law, DEIB, disability rights, justice and access, and of course, workplace mental health, right? And we're going to be bringing all these perspectives together, all of this experience and expertise together to really examine the fault lines that this incident has revealed, right? To really attempt to chart a path forward towards creating workspaces that are genuinely safe, accountable, and equitable for working professionals and parents and their children. Smriti, Vamsi, it's a pleasure to share space with the both of you. I'm just going to invite you in to really introduce yourselves and spotlight for our audience today a little bit about your journey and your expertise.
Right. Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Rosanna, for really facilitating today's conversation. It's a very pertinent conversation and has also brought spotlight into many aspects in terms of the structures that the organizations are adopting right now. And like you said, what are also the fault lines? And I think today's the time to really sit back and reflect on it. And so in that context, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Smriti Makramitha. I pronounce it she and her. I'm a mother to a 7-year-old, and I think that ING is going to really hold space today. Also practicing psychotherapist for the last 17 plus years and the co-founder of Inclusive Advisory. And it's a pleasure to be having these conversations with you and Vamsi today.
Thank you, Smriti. Vamsi, would you like to come in as well?
Sure, Rosanna. Thank you so much for the introduction. I'm Vamsi Mohana. I'm currently leading legal compliance and client relations at Equilibrium Advisory. I have a little under 10 years of experience in corporate governance. I've been supporting organizations in building the POSH compliance as well as in kind of planning the safeguarding approach to the policies, compliances, and committees. And I'm also really looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Smriti and Vamsi. And I think that's just a fraction, really, of everything that you do and all your journey has been so far. But thank you for putting that in context for everyone who's meeting you for the first time virtually. Now, before we go further, before I even start to talk about the first question, I really want to be upfront about something, right? The incident that I mentioned that's prompted this entire conversation, it's still under active investigation. And today we are really not here to comment on any specific facts of that case. None of us are going to be really speculating about what did or didn't happen. What we're really here to do is to talk honestly about the systems, the gaps, the responsibilities that this moment has really put into focus, right? For every organization, employer, particularly those who are really working in the space of childcare or offering childcare support services and facilities, to their employees. And I really, really want to highlight that at the outset itself. Also holding space for July being Disability Pride Month, and really wanting to also anchor certain conversations around, which are often overlooked, honestly, around the needs of neurodivergent and disabled children within the workplace childcare infrastructure, right? And I'm going to pause there and I'm going to step into the first question. And, Smriti, I really appreciate how you also shared that you are a mother to a 7-year-old. And that really makes me think that these are not identities that we can leave behind. they follow us wherever we go, into every conversation that we are a part of. For me personally as well, so I'm a mother of a toddler, navigating the workplace, responsibilities, roles, and everything else alongside that role and identity of being a mother. And I think, when this news emerged, when I saw certain clips, certain things being posted about this, it really struck a nerve for me. Uh, One of the things was I was acutely aware of my own emotions that were coming up. There was anxiety, there was disappointment, there was sadness, there was a touch of fear there as well, right? There was this wondering, a lot of uncertainty that I could feel about what is really happening, right? I was also really feeling a lot of emotion for the child because the child is the same age as my toddler right now. And I was wondering about the emotional and mental health of that parent as well, particularly to be able to see this, on a platform like this. And honestly, I was really sitting with this thought that, navigating the journey of a parent, a mother with a toddler at the workplace, really showing up in all of these roles, responsibilities. To be very honest, it's only possible when I can rely on the infrastructure systems of support around me, be it my community, my family, or any other systems and structures made available at the workplace that support or ensure my child's well being. But I found myself really thinking, how safe are these systems? Who can I really trust? Um, and I also want to hear from both of you, when I set this context, and I'm sharing very vulnerably also some of the thoughts that were going through my mind after holding space as a mental health professional, having worked in child safety, having worked in compliances with, at Equilibrium, the kind of work we do for so many years, and still having these thoughts and emotions, being taken aback. And I also want to hear from both of you, what did it bring up for you? What were your first reactions, thoughts? What kind of processing and meaning making did you make?
Yes, I think will really resonate with your experience, Rosanna. And because when my son was 3 years old, I had also put him in a creche, right? Just to be able to, even though we work from home, we have a hybrid work culture at Equity Advisory. It's important just for the child, so you can get some focus time and the child to be constructively engaged. And we feel that creche might be a better space to be in. So after the toddler school, you can have the child go to the creche, but just for a couple of hours for constructive play, for engaging, for building interpersonal skills by interacting with peers of their own age as well. And creche was a default choice, right? Because my parents don't stay with me. And so when you do not have that kind of support system at home and you do not want the child to be only engaging with your support staff at home, you would like them to be constructively be engaging with stakeholder, with caregivers who can read a book to them, ensure that they're eating well. And I remember back in the day when he was 3, so he was going to a creche, and every day I would get this sheet from the creche talking about how many meals he's eaten, what all has he eaten, how many times has he pooped, right? How many glass of water has he had as well? Did he take a nap or not, right? And what are the books he read? What are the activities that he engaged in? What are the skills that they focused on? And getting that sheet every day was very assuring. In fact, it was much more assuring for me to have him in the creche while having, as opposed to having him right next door in the next room. And when he would be in the next to so when my son was born, we had placed these CCTV cameras everywhere, right? And if the CCTV camera will just glitch for a minute, right, my heart will start beating very fast. And I know that I'm on a work call right now, and I'm finding ways how to excuse myself to just go check in on him, even though he's very much in his own house, right, with people that I have hired, right? But if the CCTV would glitch, there was this anxiety pang that I will get in that moment. And the reason I'm sharing all of this is the fact that because when this news really came out or a month ago, and it brought back all of those anxieties back to me. Or what does supportive and a safe space really look like, where I know that there are these cameras out there, I'm getting this assuring sheet of what all he has done, what all he's eaten, what all he has consumed. And when that tech glitch happens, what it did to me, right? And this is one of the conversations that, one of the feelings that I was sitting with of this fear, this anxiety, this uncertainty we're talking about. It also brought another layer of anxiety and disappointment because I have studied and worked in Bangalore. And I know that when I was in Bangalore, I was working, I was staying away from family again by myself. A lot of my friends, They're not having support system. So when you're really talking about creche, the creche comes in as part of the maternity benefits, right? The fact that you're offering a benefit is almost like a perk that is being offered to families, not realizing it's not a perk, it's a necessity. That if that creche is not available to people, they cannot continue to pursue as they have their professional identity and pursue their careers, right? Uh, and I also understand that there's a very thin ice that is there in terms and that is breaking so easily because when these structures are breaking, these systems are breaking, we are stripping off those professional identities from a woman again. Because again, when you really look at what has really happened right now, there's a lot of conversation and narrative that I think women also have to really navigate. That if you're going back to work so early in after having a child, that means you're prioritizing your work over your child, right? And that also brings in a sense of immense amount of guilt. And and what I was left sitting with was also my experience of working with a lot of young mothers, or even mothers who are working, holding leadership positions as well, and how they navigate guilt constantly in those spaces, right? That today I'm staying back at work to finish this project right now because an important client will bill. And doesn't matter what, regardless of the age of the child, the fact that I'm not showing up for dinner with my children, that brings in guilt, right? So when we are making these constantly navigating these choices, and when something like this happens, it really intensifies the guilt. That if I was at home, my child didn't have to go to the creche. If I had just checked that CCTV camera and I could have checked on this. But in this, some cases, you don't have access to live footage of CCTV, right? What if something terrible could have happened, right? And then we go down the downward spiral of what if. And when this incident has come in, it has also dented trust into the systems of creches now, right? Is it safe enough for me to put my child in a creche? What if this happens to my child? Is it worth taking that risk? And when women are young mothers or young parents are sitting with that question, it might result into one of the parents deciding not to pursue their professional identities, which also means it will impact the organizations because then they're going to lose that talent, right? So
Absolutely.
really, this incident is just not about that one crash. It's telling us how it's a systemic issue. And when one system fails, it's a reflection about what other systems are also failing, which could mean that, and we have not even touched upon the impact on children, right? So, uh, the impact on children, impact on mothers, impact on organizations, impact on the trust, impact on what will future hold for those young parents and for the organizations who are offering this benefit to the young parents. So, I think sitting with a lot of emotions and a lot of thoughts, which hoping to really unpack both of you in this hour.
Thank you, Smriti. I think, I'm always inspired by your ability to bring in your vulnerability and bring in your insight and your expertise all together and hold space for all of it. Thank you for really highlighting these journeys and how complex they are, and highlighting what mental health impact really looks like for parents, mothers on a good day, without all of this kind of lack of trust and uncertainty, without this layer of what we are seeing as blatant or overt abuse of violence. And that in itself is so challenging to navigate, and how really incidents like this create more complexities for parent-child interactions, and marriages, and all sorts of relationships get impacted, right? Including ones, working relationships, working identity, the organizational reputation. The impact is really, I think we were going to cover that, but you've already laid out that landscape, and I really appreciate it. Mamsi, going to bring you in as well, right? What are some of the things that you were sitting when you came to know about this incident or the clips?
So, Rosanna, while Smriti was speaking, I was also thinking of an adjective on how to describe this incident, and I was thinking maybe unfortunate, but the very preventable nature of this incident makes it very hard to call it unfortunate. As a society, I think whenever an incident like this occurs, specifically involving children, it makes us all very uncomfortable. It's because children, they don't have an ability to recognize that an environment is unsafe for them, or they cannot themselves proactively put themselves out of that situation, or they themselves cannot report the harm. I'm not saying like as a blanket rule, no children can, but overall, a child should not be expected to. So therefore, as a society, we all have higher standards. We are first of all place ourselves in a higher standard that if there is a child around us, there somehow we are in a duty of care with them. If we look normally, parents are usually primary caregivers, and therefore it's under their primary responsibility that children are. But at the same point of time, state also has a responsibility to ensure that no matter where children are going, if at all they are stepping out of the house in a public space and from a public space going to an institution, they should always be protected. A trail of law at home to protect them even from their own parents, outside from strangers, and in institution from institutional stakeholders. So a chain of law should always be there which protects children at all stages. Therefore, when that breaks, so an incident like that occurs, it creates a lot of discomfort, and I also experience the same emotions. And then, secondly, specifically with this incident, one more thing that I was pondering over is that the parents here are bringing their children to the workspace. So they are trusting their workspace, that the workspace here is going to take a complete responsibility of how the child is going to be there in the creche. They have outsourced the responsibility. The employers have outsourced this responsibility again to the creche service providers, and further, this responsibility has been outsourced to the creche caregivers. So there's been 3 or 4 change of hands where the responsibility has been transferred, and there it got me wondering that who is looking into each change of hands and what type of responsibilities are being transferred. So even the UN Convention on Rights of Child basically says that at all points of time the child must be protected, which more or less the Indian law also is there. So despite having these many laws, these many safeguards, these many measures, it completely lapsed and an incident like this occurred. And just like any other incident, most of the incidents don't happen without any signs or without any early signs or without any early symptoms. There is always a trail or some early reports or some chatter around it, which probably the organization or the caregivers or someone might have, there is somebody who has missed the mark on identifying this. So, therefore, in this conversation, I also want to, while we speak more about this, I want to discuss with you both more on safeguarding versus security. What is security? What is safeguarding? How they can be implemented? Then, if at all these failures are being caused, and despite such a vast, robust legal landscape being there, incident like this has occurred, then how do we prevent such incidents, and what type of accountability and responsibility should look like in incidents like this?
See, that was so beautifully put. I think, I like how you're locating uh, what our expectations of children should even be as stakeholders of well-being, and you're highlighting that it can't be children who need to take, any measures in these situations. And that also puts into perspective a lot of times when we talk about children talking about incidents, right? And making disclosures, but that's really not where we need to start the conversation at all. And you've put that into focus right off the bat, and thank you for doing that. I think you've also very neatly talked about a chain of, you called it a chain of law when it comes to the duty of safeguarding, the accountability that really needs to be there when it comes to responsibility was the word you used. When it comes to child safety, you talked about how it's almost like this is changing hands, from the parents to the institution to another facility. And all of this very, very important because I think at each stage of these change of hands, also the requirements are going to look very different. And we are going to map out all of that, as we go along. What are the requirements for an employer, for example? But the first thing that I want to step in is, and I think we've tiptoed around it a little bit. What are the gaps that are clearly emerging? Because you also talked about the warning signs, right? It has clearly escalated in this case, or what we know about it so much. It's sort of escalated to a point of overt violence. And in the work we do, we also understand that overt violence is the tip of the iceberg, and there are many layers that sort of contribute to getting to that point. When we talk about the pyramid of violence as well. So it seems to be that we are saying that there are gaps in this entire process, right? And I want to invite both of you in to really locate what those gaps could look like from your own expertise. So Smriti, to really look at the more psychosocial elements that we are constantly engaging with anyway at the firm of the work we do, because we constantly talk about how we are blending the legal and the psychosocial, and there is a reason why we need to do this to ensure effective implementation of any of the psychosocial laws we work on. So really inviting you to look at a breakdown of the psychosocial gaps that kind of need to be strengthened or filled. And Nancy, later on, if we can look at more in terms of compliances, in terms of legal regulations, or those kind of gaps that might have also been missed out, or in an incident of this nature, right? Not necessarily this case particularly, because I'm also inviting this question. I mean, I'm putting this question to both of you because you have been working with a lot of organizations over the years with touch points with children, at varying degrees of touch points with children, but across industries, and really looking at all of these, conversations, and we're looking at identifying gaps in childcare. So Smriti, you can go first, and then maybe Vansi.
Yeah. I think while you have beautifully delineated the two questions and asked me to respond from a psychosocial perspective and from a legal perspective, I'm smiling because I think that's what the work really does. We don't work in silos; we work at intersections, right? So, I guess my response will also come from that space of intersections of looking at compliance, but not really getting to that space in depth, but also looking at how the psychosocial aspects also comes in those within those compliances itself, right? Because when you're looking at an organization having a creche, right, within their own organization or having a tie-up, and having a creche say within 500 meters, as the Maternity Benefits Act also requires the organizations to. So people clearly are then being compliant, right? The specifics of it, Vamsi can get into. But the thing I think, so the gap is not in the compliance piece from my perspective. It's in terms of accountability, what Vamsi really spotlighted. We have a policy. We are doing these training sessions. We have a creche. But what kind of trainings are we really doing in such cases? You know, Perhaps there could be like a sheet that you need to really fill in, what I was talking about right now. But what do you really do when you have, because in a creche, you're likely to have, say, 15 or 20 kids showing up, with diverse needs in the age group of say 2 to 3, who are not in terms of, and there could be differences, communication differences, language differences. We also spoke about children with disabilities, neurodivergence, their needs, accommodations could be very different as well. In these trainings itself, how are we getting the caregivers to understand their own distress, to really regulate their own nervous system when they have 5 children crying at the same time? As young parents, we often say it's so difficult to raise one child when the child is crying, it's exhausting. Now imagine caregivers handling 15 or 20 children of a similar age group for a period of 8 to 9 hours every single day, right? Coming with their own set of own challenges as well. Maybe coming from context background, which could also be very high stressful, may not have all the support that is needed, maybe poorly paid roles, right? So the research shows that if there's any adult working in high stress, low support, poor paid caregiving roles, are themselves at a very high risk of burnout and emotional dysregulation. And you're putting those caregivers in the space which is already, and it's going to be high stress of working and taking care of 2 to 3 year olds, 15 or 20 at one time, with diverse needs. Now, how is our training modules, which are there, could be self-paced learning modules, someone coming in doing a 1 hour session, but what is the kind of support that's been given to the caregivers? And I think that's a gap. I don't know of any creche, any parent for that matter, who goes through this kind of training to take care of yourselves and regulate your own emotions when the child is in distress. And that I feel is one of the biggest gaps that we're seeing here, right? The other thing also, when you're looking at, even if you're doing training, we are always looking at the default child, a neurotypical child, with similar kind of needs. But what about when there's a neurodivergent child or child with disability? Where everyone has a very individualized routine. There could be sensory differences, language differences, and it goes beyond the generic training module. How are we really even holding space for those differences, because there is lack of awareness, by the age of 2. And even if sometimes child goes undiagnosed, and even if the child has been diagnosed, parents shy away from even talking about it to protect the child from the stigma that the child can experience. So there's again this gap that comes in between the primary caregiver, which is parents, and the secondary caregivers in this situation. Right? The third aspect here, which again we need to understand, like it is a 2 to 3 year old. This is also the time period when you trying to toilet train the child. Bathrooms are already very, very emotionally loaded spaces for children. And historically, punishment was looked at locking the child in the bathroom. Stand in one corner, right? Leave the child. Now imagine what that really does to the child in those cases. And that kind of training of how each space can also be seen as a space as threatening to the child, which can also result into a fear response, a trauma response in those cases. So training also needs to look at how we need to understand the child's developmental stages and what the child really needs and how we're really responding to those spaces. We have to also look at then neglect in this space, right? When a child is crying, and usually how does, when as a mental professional, we often talk about attachment styles, right? How does a child really develop a secure attachment style? When the child cries, goes to the caregiver soothes them down, and when this happens over a period of time, child builds a secure attachment style. But when they are dismissed, there's neglect comes in. There's punishment coming in, leaving the child, letting the child regulate their own emotions. What will happen to their attachment style in such situations? And a caregiver here is holding a very important in a creche where the child spending about 8 to 9 hours with them, or even say 4 to 5 hours with them. They are playing the role of a secondary caregiver. So I think within training, there's so many nuances to it as well that we're looking at, where the caregivers need to understand their own nervous system when they are feeling dysregulated, which could also be coming from the fact that of their own stresses from different roles that they hold, not having adequate support system, then looking at the demands of the children that is being placed on them, not understanding the diverse needs because the training did not go beyond the generic training in such cases right now, not really understanding the child's developmental stages, not being able to understand how these spaces have to be monitored, not giving those kind of skills to them, right? And then above and all of that, that even to understand that these gaps are there and these training needs are emerging, we need to have our eyes on that, right? Most of these places do not either have CCTVs, or they have CCTVs maybe like one or two, but not really covering every nook and corner. And an analogy that I would like to bring in here is, if for an organization, say you have some very confidential data in a room, right? So physical files. Would you not have CCTVs that will cover each corner of the room to ensure that we have everything covered? But we're not doing the same thing for a room which has children. And I think that's a gap, because then, like Vamsi was saying, we're not taking that accountability. Like my responsibility was to give it to another stakeholder. So I have carried out my responsibility, but not taken the accountability of the process. Right? Which is when I would say that, when the CCTV would glitch, when I was talking earlier, in my own house, my heart will skip a beat. Now imagine when there's a creche with 20 children who are being addressed, and they may perhaps only say 2 or 3 people. What is a teacher or a caregiver to a child ratio for such young kids? Ideally, should be say 1:2, 1:3, but that's not what we have. So I think those are the gaps that's really standing out to me. uh, which really needs to be reflected upon and thought through, and perhaps what is emerging as a reactive stance, if that could be turned as a proactive stance.
Yeah, thank you, Smriti. I think again we are excavating layers in this landscape that are very nuanced. And I'm, just want to uh, come back to some of the things you were saying because I thought they were really, really important. We were talking about not understanding, not having adequate information, to maybe process uh, a child's developmental growth pattern and the developmental needs that are emerging. And we hear so many stories about the terrible twos and the you know teenager threes, and these are very challenging uh, you know parts of childhood development, where children are trying out their autonomy, where there may be conflict emerging. And I'm also wondering whether we are giving people enough tools to really be able to build new conflict management skills, which won't work in a corporate space or amongst partners. It's going to be a very different map that we need to really navigate when it comes to conflict with children, right? And regulation becomes a very big thing, because I know that for a lot of even mothers with similar age children that I talk to, and Smriti, I may have talked to you about this in the past as well. Hitting becomes, the child is responding by hitting. How do I regulate myself in that moment so I am not responding with the same thing, right? How do I make different choices? And I think, given the work we do, I'm also thinking about the importance of unpacking unconscious bias. Who is the child that I'm working with, right? And how is my response basis the identity that they may be carrying, and the identity internalized, superiority or otherwise that I may be carrying about my identity as a caregiver. How do I unpack that? When it comes to, like you're saying, moving from reacting from a certain map, that we have to really building a map so that people can choose better ways of really responding. I'm also wondering, what does support spaces look like? Because you really talked about a very challenging environment. It's high stress. What are support spaces really looking like for childcare providers? What do we even think about it? Is that something we need to look at? I think we have a lot of these frameworks when it comes to all other, we have supervision for therapists, we have a mentor that we can check in with somebody else, but are there formalized spaces where people can say, hey, things aren't really working out and I need to check in? I think those were things that I was sitting with, Smriti, while you were sharing. There's so many layers to it, but I'll refrain and give you a moment to respond if you want to before we move to Vansi.
Yeah, I think, like I said, no, this is brings up so many emotions, because I think it's coming in also from a space of so many identities, right? Because when I'm sitting and having this conversation, I'm holding identity of a mother, of a therapist, who have heard multiple stories of young parents, right, and their own struggles as well. I'm also sitting here as also an employer of my own staff, right, at home, knowing the stories and the backgrounds people come with, right? The struggles that they really have, of how much they, because they are not handed over with those privileges that we do have. The fact that we're able to even have this conversation, I think, is a reflection of our own privilege, right? Uh, the labels that we, I mean, I'm also sitting with all the labels that the society also hands it over to women, especially, and young women, working women, a working mother, and I think each one of us is so different, right? And I'm also sitting here as a mentor to young mothers. If you look at our own organization, we have so many young mothers in our own firm, and everyone's challenges and unique challenges that too. And as a supervisor, mentor. So I think there are so many of these roles that I'm sitting with right now, and with these roles, I also meet all the stories of people's experiences, right? That each situation is so different and so unique. Like today, we can have this conversation right now to really unpack, but it's going to be a very bird's eye view, very overarching. It's not really responding to the unique situations right now. But if I have to really break it down in terms of, from the perspective of what we're listening, right, we don't know. Like, that's what I'm trying to say, that we don't know what has really happened in this incident, right? But we know from a larger understanding that, when they are crash caregivers coming in. There are people who are coming in who are waking up at say 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the morning. having to do their household work, then making that trip in Bangalore because traffic is very bad. So I don't know where they stay. I have no idea about that. But maybe making that taking multiple public transport, getting there for 2 hours, being there, not sure if they've had their breakfast, they've not had their breakfast. Handed over these 15, 20 kids with diverse needs right now, with different schedules, right? Maybe some allergies, something that they can have, they cannot have, some children are crying. Um, and then there is no one to go back to. Say perhaps they're also the caregiver child ratio we are not really sure of. We know that there were about 40 plus enrolled in this crash. 15, 20 used to turn up every day. If you were to say 1:3 as well, that means if there are 15 kids, you need to have at least 5 people, right? We don't always see that in a crash, so I don't think. Right? We know that from the case CPCR regulation that there were no live CCTV monitoring that was taking place. So there are all of these gaps that are there. All that I'm explaining about the challenges does not mean it's an excuse to inflict harm to a child. What I'm saying is the fact that was there space enough to say the fact to identify and recognize that I'm not able to cope with this today. That today I need additional support. Right? If the final person is not turning up, is there a backup available? Do we have those resources identified? We're looking at recognizing the fact that if the child is not doing okay, can I monitor that on CCTV? If the child has diverse needs, we're asking the fact that we don't know how to handle this child, right? Is there space for all of those things? Is there space for parents to be vulnerable enough to say, you know what, my child is on the spectrum. My child has sensory differences. The fact that if you have make too much noise, or you give this, you mix two different textures in the food, my child will not be able to manage that because there's sensory differences. Do we feel safe enough to talk about it, right? What we're really saying is that it's an entire systemic issue where none of us are feeling safe enough. And we always say in therapy that when there is a concern that with the child is the identified patient. We call them as IP. They're the identified patient. They're not the problem. They're reflecting
Absolutely.
the problem in the system right now. So today, what has really happened in the crash? Yes, the child was crying. Child is not the problem. The fact that the caregiver could not manage, they did not know, did not have the tools to deal with it. That's a gap in the training. A gap in the systems. It's a systemic issue. So it's talking about how our systems are failing us. And Vamsi asked right at the very outset, who is taking accountability for this? Yes, I'm being compliant, but what does compliance really mean? Ticking the box? Or really checking if that system, that compliance measures are being supportive for the people who are availing those services? And I think that's the larger question.
Absolutely, Smriti. That is the big question, I think. And I think that's a good place to bring you back into the conversation, Vamsi, because, a lot, uh, you very nicely put it across as, changing hands, and you talked about, the law really, having certain safeguards in place. But are there any gaps? Are there any gaps at the level of policy, at the level of implementation, at the level of, legislation as well, right? Where are we really sitting? What are your thoughts on
So, Rosanna, the first stat I think that we have to keep in consideration while discussing this is that actually, despite the law being there, a lot of organizations don't have crashes at all. Almost 75% of IT employers who were recently surveyed, this was in 2023, they did not have a crash at all. And out of the ones who did not have a crash, 21% had no intent of establishing it. And we speak with employers quite often, and we provide services in the field of maternity benefits, policy, reporting, etc. So we often ask the employers that what are your concerns around having a crash? They're scared of liabilities. They're scared of the cost that comes with having a crash in place. They're worried that they don't have the infrastructure or they don't have enough budget to train their employees and train everyone within the organization in a manner that the crash is properly placed, safe, So organizations are aware that a creche is not just a compliance, it is definitely a responsibility as well. So even when we look at the organizations who have creches, their monitoring is not continuous. Okay, during onboarding, even if there is a crash, they do not continuously onboard it. When we speak about POSH also, how we do our services, we have an initial service, we continuously monitor the compliance throughout the year. Same level of compliance and scrutiny should apply to a crash. Same level of supervision should apply to a crash. Your policies, you have to keep testing them again and again if this policy is working out. If at all there are parts of policy, aspects of policy which are not working out, then they require changes. And thereby, it is very important for such policies to be drafted by experts. Then there is a lot of emphasis, as Smriti very rightly pointed out. If at all there is a document, there will be CCTV cameras, there will be n number of security features to ensure that a document is not taken away. Even if, let's say, for a crash, a security feature is in place, it is very different from having a safeguarding feature, in the sense that everyone within the ecosystem, be it an employee who is not having children, they don't have any children, but they're still within the premises where the crash is, the employer who is basically approving the crash, the person who is onboarding the vendor for a crash, everyone should have a certain level of sensitivity and certain level of training to know that what is their individual responsibility in the setup. For example, let's just say that let's say that I'm an organization, I want to today make sure that there is a crash in my institution. So I will go to my procurement team. My procurement team will say that, okay, your legal will do the work, the contracting on this. Neither procurement team nor legal team, let's say it's an IT company, they are of course experts in their own field, and we cannot, but do they have the expertise to ensure and to check that if at all they're onboarding a crash service provider, they will be able to fulfill the requirements of children, like how Smriti pointed out. It's not even, there are so many things that are required to be in consideration. But whenever a procurement team is taking a decision, it is more likely a decision based around cost. It is more likely a decision based around, say, okay, we can close it in 30 days. Or there are so many business factors which are coming into deciding what type of crash or how this crash has to be onboarded. But this is the safeguarding aspect of having a crash cannot be decided just by what compliances you have in place. Whether you have just a CCTV in place, whether you just have a policy in place, whether you have a child protection committee in place, whether the entire crux of it is how everyone is trained to respond in the situation, and how whether or not they have the sensitivity to deal with it, whether or not the procurement knows that, okay, this certain thing, it is not just a cost based decision, it requires more expertise for us to understand whether they are suitable partners for us or not in the transaction. So this is also a service we provide here at Equilibrio. We support organizations with this, with their policies, with vetting the vendors, with training the vendors, training caregivers. So these are all parts of our services. And yeah, one more thing I want to highlight is that for organizations who have a crash, 54% of the employees, they view that it as a retention tool. They feel that it is good if we have this, it is a retention tool. And 51% believe that it is because we want to keep promoting diversity within the organization. If you see, the entirety of the lens is employee centric and not child centric. So an organization, if it does not have the expertise to deal with child, if it's a child institution like a school, their expertise will be very different as compared to just an organization which is a tech company or a banking organization. They don't have the expertise. So they should, while they should have, all the organizations should keep this in mind, that they should keep the safeguarding aspects of all the also in mind, in addition to security and compliance.
Thank you, Vamsi. I think it's a very interesting distinction that you're bringing up, security and safeguarding. And it's just reminding me of this conversation. So when I was looking for preschools and play schools and creche areas, and I at the time was asking a person who was heading a child a play group, a kind of a setup. So will I, because I was sitting with a lot of anxiety, right? And it would be the first time that my toddler would have been away from me. I was very nervous. And I was asking her, listen, so will I have access to live CCTV footage? Can I see my child all the time? So she said no. And I said, don't you think that would be nice? She's like, so she told me this and it really stayed with me. She said, if you have access to view your child all the time, someone else also has access to view your child all the time. And that really made
Yeah.
me stay. And particularly in the context of the conversations that we're seeing emerging around, child sexual abuse material that's also becoming rampant. I mean, there are so many advisories being sort of issued about sharing children's information online, photos online, for schools and for parents. And, you know, when you then say safeguarding, I'm also wondering about the existing CCTV footage, even if it's not live. How are we saving it? How are we really, do we have
Absolutely.
the systems and protocols in place to really treat this with care? And that raises, further, um, I think, gap, or it's really highlighting that it's not just about individual people, but it's also about a larger systemic concern that we need to look at end to end to really, really locate what child safety is going to look like in these spaces. And Smriti, then I'm coming back to you with a thought here, and I'm maybe taking a couple of steps back with this. But what does it really mean then? And we're talking about so many things. There is law, there's safeguarding security, legislative policies, frameworks, all of this. And we also touched on the psychosocial, but something that Vamsi said a little earlier about a retention tool, right? These sort of things as a retention tool, and jumping off from there, what does it really mean for an organization to look at caregiving as a integral part of an employee's experience? Part of who one is at the workplace, not just some sort of personal circumstance that they are quietly managing on their own. I'm asking you this also because of the kind of systems we are building actively at Equilibrio, where, and you and Sana are the leaders here. And we have quite a lot of mothers who've returned, from maternity leave. And so what is the shift that's really needed, right, for organizations to be able to treat caregiving and not just maternity, but any sort of caregiving as a valid and integral part of an employee's life and existence?
Um, I think first, is in terms of just assessing what position we are taking right now. So is the position that we're taking right now that we want to be compliant, or the position we're taking and the intent is to create a safe space for everyone, right? So I think it boils down to intentionality. If we are very intentional, the fact that we want to genuinely create a safe space, we'll get all our answers there, right? Uh, so I think the first question is our intent. Where are we at? Because that will really pave the way of how we do it subsequently. Because if my intent is the fact that I want to be compliant, I will do a annual checking of the fact that, do I have a creche? Do I renew my contract with the same provider? Do I look for another provider? And like Mamsi was saying that, I have to then go with a provider that makes business sense, which means the procurement team or the finance team, or whichever the stakeholders who are making these financial decisions are, which provider can give me these ABCD things in the minimal cost, right? Who can provide me with these trainings with the lowest price point, right? I'm being compliant here. But if I'm being very intentional about this, then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to do an annual review, but I'm going to maybe do a monthly or quarterly review. I will have perhaps surprise check-ins. I will just go and maybe check someone to go and taste the food that is being served. Go and check the hygiene of the bathrooms right now. Are the CCTV cameras working or not working? Where are they saved? Who has access to it? What if one person leaves? Can they take backups? Do they have access to USBs? You know, so that's my intent. So the first thing is intentionality. And if I have the intent, then we look at, like I said, whatever measures that we are being put into place today, post this incident, we start doing it proactively. Now there is advisory that there should be now audits taking place at all creches. Just put that in place, right? We need to have live CCTV footage. Put that in place, right? Yes, we don't want to give access to everyone. We understand those concerns. We have to think through it. But then look at who has access to it right now. Who's checking it? Are there any corners in the creche that are perhaps not really covered through CC footage, right? When we are looking at, for example, the Maternity Benefits Act also has this called National Minimum Guidelines, which really lays out all the things, compliances that the creches specifically have to follow. We have state-specific guidelines specifically for creches that we do have, right? What is the level of adherence to those guidelines? No one is asking those questions. Last year, I think 16 May 2025, MCA came out with a notification right now, which is specifically for POSH, because we also work in that area. So they spoke, the report that goes into the director's report in terms of the POSH compliances. So they had spoken about giving a more extensive report, which is similar to the report that goes to district officer. In the same guideline notification, MCA also came out the fact that all the organizations also have to disclose that they're being compliant with Maternity Benefits Act. But all the MCA had asked for one line, that are you compliant with the Maternity Benefits Act? MCA is not asking for details. Like POSH, we have a detailed report for them. They're not asking that, right? No one is asking whether you're being compliant with national minimum guidelines or not. Why are we not asking these questions? We have legislation in place. It's a beautiful piece of legislation. There are supposed to be committees, there's supposed to be authorities looking at compliances, but no one's asking the question. It seems like a reactive approach every single time. Whether it's POSH, it's POXO, it's maternity, any law that we work in, right? For trans folks or RPWD, every time it's a reactive approach. It comes down to intentionality.
Absolutely, Smriti. I'm reminded also about how so many new notifications came out in the space of POXO as well after the Badlapur case. But some of these things, could have, like you said, if intentionality was there, some of these things could have possibly even been part of people's workflow and workspace and practice as well before the guidelines needed to come out. And I think that's a very important distinction that it's almost like you're dropping a challenge, in front of people saying, are you going to choose being proactive or are we going to wait for another, and like Vamsi said, it's not unfortunate when it's, when it is in this context, because there is so much more that we need to work towards, so much more accountability on us in spaces like so, and by us, I mean all stakeholders in children's well-being processes. And with that, I don't know where time has gone. So I'm quickly going to come to one of the key conversations and I know that we don't have time to go into it in depth, Vamsi, and Smriti, you've already touched on some of the, key aspects of compliances laid out under several, you've named several laws, but Vamsi, if I can come back to you and really ask you, what are the frameworks? What are the institutional obligations that organizations, employees need to be aware of when it comes to child safety and child care? Particularly in the context that we're talking in, right? What is that legal landscape like? And if you can also talk about what happens when those systems fail. So, we know that there are systems in place, but sometimes they do not work as prescribed. There are gaps. And what happens, what can parents look at in terms of legal recourse or legal remedy when systems have failed? So just, putting that to you.
Sure, Rosanna. I think many of the points that I would have talked about, Rosanna, Smriti, and Rosanna, you both have already mentioned. There is a large framework protecting children. There is, of course, the Maternity Benefit Act itself, though it does not have a lot of provisions in itself to protect the children. The establishment of creche itself is under the Act. There is, of course, POXO and JJ Act. There is also, Smriti mentioned, the National Minimum Standards Protocol for creches. There are for child-facing institutions, even there are plenty of guidelines, frameworks, books which have been released by NCPCR. So there is a huge iota of bodies actually looking into this, and being very honest, even working in this space, it is very confusing to navigate. that which institution is supposed to have what type of policy, which institution is supposed to have what type, are they supposed to have a child protection committee, are they supposed to have a child abuse monitoring committee. It is, we also spend a lot of time researching, okay, this is your type of institution, so this is the framework you need to have. So it is only, I mean, we can understand when organizations are themselves not able to navigate it. So more or less the summary across every regulation which is there is, there has to be each facility which is housing children, be it a creche, be it a child facing institution, child housing institution, they need to put surveillance in place. So surveillance definitely looks like CCTV cameras, protection, physical controls should be in place, which mean a gate should be locked. Anyone who's entering into the premises, the visitors, their visit should be recorded, their in time, out time should be recorded. Any person who is having direct access to the children should be a verified individual. So that means that the organization have authorized for that person to interact with the child. Even if that does not even mean speaking, that even means being in the vicinity of the child. If in a premises you have the child and you have someone besides the child, it has to be an authorized, verified person who needs to be there or who has been approved by the organization to be there in some direct way, not just that they're there by some way of specific records. Of course, there has to be CCTV surveillance, which has been failing, as Smriti said, it's not adequately covering a lot of institutions. Sometimes they're there, they don't work. During investigations, we find out that the CCTV cameras have not been working, which will be a critical point when I also speak about what remedies people have, what remedies parents have in case all these compliances fail. Then further, there is also requirement for continuous supervision and to establish a clear reporting mechanism within the organization. And all this is only and only possible if organizations have a policy where they're able to document this entire process of child safeguarding in their premises. So, of course, as you can see that the source, there are many sources from there coming. So organizations should be able to identify that what applicability do they have and put it in a place, and again verify that okay, on a quarterly basis we are checking these are XYZ notifications and we are adding this into our policy and we are adding that system into place. So that is very important. However, even if all the compliances are in place, there is no guarantee that incidents like this would not occur. So something that really was heartbreaking for me as someone who works in the space of child safety, child safeguarding, was the video of the child from the Jaipur school, wherein the child is very distressed, and it was very stressful to watch because the entire premises, if you see, is covered by CCTV. You can see the entire incident on CCTV. The school, if they say that you cannot hold them accountable for saying that there is no security in place, they had the supervision, they had the ability to see, still the system failed them in the safeguarding aspect. The person who was supposed to respond to the distress was not trained enough to respond to the distress. I have utmost respect for teachers, and I can only imagine managing such a huge class with so many questions. It can't be easy. So on top of that, taking responsibility for an individual child on how to do it, a training would be helpful. So organizations, even if they are following these compliances, they have to evaluate what are their own specific needs as an organization. So that school, there were so many floors on the school. They should have identified that there is always a possibility that someone would be able to jump from this floor, given that the railing is not high, even adequately high enough, or they were not able to provide adequate teachers the training to this. So a lot of people are there watching the child in distress, but almost nobody is able to respond in that situation. So they have to identify that these are our unique needs, and we have to go above and beyond compliance to ensure that any such incident doesn't occur in the premises. And this always should not, I mean, of course, it has to be done from a protecting oneself from liability perspective, but also from a responsibility towards the child perspective. Both parallelly should be considered, and both parallelly should be consideration for each and every control that they have in place for workplace. Like as Smriti said, whenever like organizations have to comply with ISO, they comply in a very robust manner. Many of these compliances have 90, 100, 200, like that controls in so organizations are not new or unaware of how to put controls in place. It's just they have to take the initiative and they have to value human capital, be it individual employees, be it children in their premises, same as the value their data, information security, business, all. So now coming to legal remedies available, I think there is a lot of sections on this. I will just generally touch upon the framework. So of course, if the offence is of sexual nature, the POCSO Act is there. Section 19 mandates mandatory reporting, compulsory reporting. And then section 21 even says that if at all there is a failure to report such offence, that is also an offence. So both are very important aspects of child safeguarding, and actually this is what puts India at par with international standards in terms of child safeguarding. I mean, India's attempt to comply with international standards. Further, there is of course BNS. Under BNS, there is provisions for negligence, grievous hurt, endangering personal safety. So there are various sections under which you can approach the police. However, we need to remember that criminal justice system is not easy to navigate in India. It's very difficult to go to the police and say that you registered the FIR. It's a very stressful process, very time taking process, and given infrastructure, if it doesn't support you, you don't have a CCTV recording which is already not working, or you don't have documentation in place, this becomes the failure of the organization gives so much stress to the parents who are trying to seek justice there. So the failure of the organization, not only are they themselves liable for this, they are completely failing with, because they failed in their responsibility. Ultimately, it results in injustice of a child not being able to seek justice from the authorities. So that has to be kept in mind. The second, option they have is of course civil liability, which focuses on negligence and duty of care. So all organizations where the child is there at all point of time, they have a duty of care towards the children. And if at all we can establish that there has been significant lapses in such duty, there can be penalties imposed. There was such a drowning case in Delhi wherein a child was left. A child had gone to school and then they went left the school premises and the child drowned in a river. But the school did not have any active part in this, but the court found that if a parent has left the child there, they have to ensure that the child for the designated hours is within the premises, and there was compensation which was avoided in this case to the applicant. So that is also an option. There are also statutory and regulatory bodies in place: SCPCR, NCPCR, DCPU, Child Welfare Committee, and they do try to address systemic failures. But very honestly, there are gaps in that also. Not a lot of states have established such bodies. Even if they have established such bodies, it's not always easy to find them and to reach them and to get a response from them. But as far as we are aware, SCPCR and NCPCR are quite responsive bodies, and though not perfect, but of course, like in such situations, such bodies are available for helping. And then finally, and most importantly, organizations should have internal reporting mechanisms, because not everything will elevate to the point of liability or to the point of a crime. There are incidents which require immediate intervention, which you will not find a recourse for that in law, because but it requires intervention immediately. Let's say in the Jaipur incident, let's say the child had not, committed suicide, and just the distress part and the teacher not addressing the distress part, that also is a cause of concern. And there should be forums within the organization to address such things, but they should be very well trained bodies. Because of compulsory reporting under POCSO, they should not be, okay, we will take up this case, we will look into this case, we will resolve this case. No, they should be trained bodies and should be able to identify that this is a subject matter for police, and this is the subject matter for internal mechanism.
Thank you, Vansi. I think there is the time we have for this particular question. I don't think it'll ever be enough because there are so many levels
Absolutely.
of accountability, so many levels of recourse, so many different angles to really look at when it comes to responsibility, liability, recourse as well. But thank you for summing it up. I think or giving us things to think about, right? And like you very, I think, I wanted to close with talking about the mental health well-being impact. And I wanted to bring you in, Smriti, and I think Vansi, by already really identifying and naming the Jaipur incident, which is of course extremely distressing, right? And like you said, the CCTVs are in place. So one aspect of security measures in place, but was safeguarding really available to the child. And I want to really end this conversation today, Smriti, by inviting you in to really talk about what the stakes are. What is the impact? Who is impacted? And why is it important to keep revisiting these conversations? And to really have more space to navigate this. So, like Vansi's also said, for specific organizations, industries, and the context, but to really keep coming back to this conversation. Why is it?
I think we've really spoken about it through the entire course of the discussion today as well, but I think I'm going to just enumerate it right now because really look at that the stakes are very, very high. That it's not one-time incident, it's not a one-time occurrence. That's something that really experiences people, it becomes part of the script, right? Any experience that people will go, or children especially will go through their foundational years, 0 to 5 years, will somewhere shape the people that they do become, right? And it will impact their development as well. So really talking about children who has experienced this physical abuse right now, emotional abuse through this period, there is going to be implications. I mean, I'm not saying there is. I mean, there's a possibility of an implication being there as well. Like I said, that if they were, like I said, we don't know the facts of the case, but if it is true or what we've seen in the video is the fact that child was locked in the bathroom, it is going to really have that impact as well in terms of the fear of those spaces as well can come in. Especially at this point in time, this could impact their development in terms of the toilet training, right? This could impact the attachment styles that they're likely to develop as well, because the person who is supposed to be the one soothing them, calming them down, helping them regulate their emotions, are also becoming the cause of that fear and that anxiety, or wanting to go back, going to the creche, leaving their parents, so the separation anxiety can increase in such situations, right? We're also another population that we are really not talking about, and we have not spoken of through this conversation, is the children who are witnessing this. Now, you have very young children, like we're talking about, say, in the age group of 2 to 3, who do not have the language development has not really taken place completely. Cognitive development has not taken place completely for them to really understand, make sense of what's really happening. There's own meaning making that's going to happen in the situations, but what they're noticing is the fact that the tonality is something the child can understand. They may not understand what is being spoken, but if there is screaming, yelling, child being pulled, pushed, not really a soothe, it becomes the energy of the space is going to be very different. And the child witnessing that will be responding to those as well, right? We are also looking at the impact on mothers, whose children went through this abuse, and also the mothers who have enrolled their children in that creche. Perhaps the children did not go through that abuse. Perhaps they were not even going for that month as well for different reasons. But the fear, the anxiety, and the guilt that they really sit with in these spaces, right, is going to be immensely high. It could result into between the two young parents deciding that one person is going to be a stay-at-home parent right now, because the stakes are very high right now. We cannot take the risk of putting a child through all of this, right? It could also really impact future young parents of choosing to either let go or taking an opportunity which will be with a reduced remuneration, where they can be around, not taking up responsibility which might involve travel, staying away from the child because they can't trust the creche. It will, as a result of that, this will impact the organization. It will impact families, right? Their household income, how they're choosing to make their decisions. It will impact organizations, they will lose talent, right? It will also impact other creches, right? Because then they will go through these audits as well, greater scrutiny, which is important, right? But it has to be a trust building work that everyone has to do right now, because mistrust is very, very high. For the caregivers in the creche, having to prove themselves constantly, being under scrutiny. Even they might be coming from a good place of intent, trust, doing maybe excellent what they do, but no one trusts them at that point in time. So they have to really look at trust rebuilding completely and overall, right? It's almost like a wake up call, right, for everyone to take accountability for this. And there's also going to be mistrust with HR, with the organizations, who are they really bringing on board, as well as creches. People might go with someone else, some other creches, not with the organization provided creche, because people are not taking accountability. So I think when you're looking at the stakes, I think this is the entire, it's not just the mental health impact that we're looking at immediately on individuals. It's the mental health impact on the society itself, right? The whole is always reinforcing this narrative that we need to have a one stay-at-home parent, and given our society has to be the mother. So all the work that we have done on women empowerment, bringing women back into the workforce, having returnships, everything comes into question. So it's not an isolated incident. It will snowball into multiple other things if this is really not nipped in the bud, and really actions are taken reactively right now, yes, but going forward proactively, right? This cannot wait anymore. And this is going to hold true for everything that we are doing, because otherwise, all the policies that we have, I mean, they're just looking good on paper. None of them are upholding the spirit and the intent of those policies.
I think that's a very anchoring comment to really, end our conversation today, Smriti, to really look at, is it just a piece of paper that we're talking about, or are there very real lives at stake? And I'm saying lives also because we know the pyramid of violence at the apex. There is death by suicide, or there is homicide, and we do not want to get to that level. So what are the proactive measures that we can really take within our context to support child safety? I think that is a very strong note to end on, and we are over time, and I do want to end the conversation. And before I do, I just want to say that I have been looking at the comments. You've got a lot of comments on this one. I think we've mostly covered all of these aspects. Just want to thank everyone for joining in, interacting as much as you have, bringing in aspects that are so relevant in the there are so many different contexts that are really spotlighted in the comment section. So thank you everyone for being there and being with us in this conversation. I want to say that I don't think this 1 hour was enough, clearly. There's a lot that we need to unearth, really sit to understand when it comes to really plugging in the gaps when it comes to child safety in workplace contexts, whatever the touch point is with children. And there are certain comments where people are asking very specific questions about, very specific intervention points. And what I would suggest is, please do reach out to us. We are a team of lawyers, psychologists, social workers, psychotherapists, trauma-informed work, queer affirmative individuals. We do a lot of work in the space of neurodiversity. We have a fabulous team of lawyers who are up to date when it comes to all the advisories on the psychosocial laws out there, all of the compliance measures. And we are ready to support you and start this conversation for what works for you. So please do reach out to us, and let's work together to make sure that child safety is always on the agenda, and we are not waiting for another reaction again. Thank you everyone for joining. It was wonderful. Thank you, Smriti. Thank you, Vamsi. I think just so privileged to be able to listen to both of you speak always. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanna, for holding space for this conversation. Thank you, Vamsi. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Rosanna. Thank you, Smriti. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.